It's The World This Week, The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from New York, Noor Ibrahim, Daily Beast Deputy World Editor. How is your July going so far?
Very good and warm.
All right, you're only 2 days in. Pierre Haski, International News Editor at French flagship public radio station France Inter. How are things for you?
Oh, very well. 2nd of July, we're still okay.
And it's France, there's vacation coming up.
And the weather is improving.
All right. Patrick Smith, Editor-in-Chief at the Africa Report. How are you?
All the better for making a channel crossing back to Paris after a 6-month absence. Great to see you.
Well, great to see you in the flesh. Also, he's in Cape Town, but you could say he's virtually in Paris. Zapiro, editorial cartoonist for the Daily Maverick newspaper. I say you're virtually in Paris because your work is showcased as part of the Cartooning in Africa exhibit that opens this Saturday in the French capital at the Forum des Images. Throughout the show, we'll be featuring your work and that of your colleagues. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks. Great to be with you. I wish I were in Paris, but it was going to be quite a hectic quarantine, and I just couldn't manage that.
All right, well, maybe we'll touch on the matter a little bit more later on. This show, we're talking about this exhibit organized by Cartooning for Peace, of which you're a member. So is Dutchman Tjeerd Royaerts, who bemoans, like this polar bear, how scientists' warnings on global warming seem to go ignored. Well, they're certainly paying attention in Lytton, British Columbia, a town you wouldn't normally associate with extreme heat, except after breaking Canada's all-time record with a high temperature of 49.5 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. And of course, now come the brush fires.
They said it's coming this way, fast. Let's get out of here.
That heat dome over the Pacific Northwest extending all the way to the Arctic Circle. Let's turn to our Canada expert, Noor Ibrahim. What's going on?
It's insane. I think that, at this point you have an entire town that's been wiped out by this. So if you need any other, proof that, climate change is real and it's so real that it's actually killing people right in front of your eyes. I mean, you quite literally have people dropping dead in British Columbia with numbers that are completely unprecedented. It's really horrific to watch.
Horrific to watch with the warm temperatures extending, again, I say it, all the way to the Arctic Circle, and that triggers kind of a vicious circle.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, there's obviously different contributing factors that cause this. You have heat domes, and that definitely plays a role. But every scientist will tell you that man-made climate change has played a huge role in this. There's no way these events, which are supposed to be, kind of once-in-a-lifetime events, would happen as frequently or as intensely as we're seeing right now.
Pierre Haski, we're building up. There's going to be another one of these UN climate summits taking place in Scotland in September. And we had one climatologist on earlier this week telling us what happens in the Arctic definitely does not stay in the Arctic. This has implications for us sitting here in Paris.
Yes, of course, and there's a feeling of helplessness. We're watching these disasters unfolding. We have these conferences. We have a lot of talk about climate change and how we're going to do things and so on. And then there's this feeling that we are so far away from what is needed. And this week there was a decision by the Conseil d'État, one of the highest courts administrative courts in France, that gave the French government 6 months to do what it promised to do to reach its own climate goals. So we are in this international context where we're setting up, goals that we even know are not enough. But we are not respecting them.
We are seeing a tightening of the rules here in France. There's this talk about really clamping down, for instance, on when it comes to those who don't insulate their homes properly.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are being done, and things are certainly more active today than they were 5 or 10 years ago, that's for sure. But as we see in Canada at the moment, it's far, far, far from being enough and up to what seems to be needed. And especially if you look around the world, I mean, you have these very high temperatures and abnormally high temperatures. In Delhi, they are around 45. In Iraq, they are at 50, in Basra at 50 degrees and no electricity. So that you have riots at the moment of people who are just hopeless. I mean, we have these intense climate deregulations that are taking place, and that's not enough to wake us up.
Should we feel helpless, Patrick Smith?
No, we should feel determined to do something about it. And I mean, moving on from Pierre's point about the French Conseil d'Etat's ruling last week, I think it was, the European Union also made a similar ruling saying that those member states that don't take action to meet this target of reducing emissions by 40% over what they were in 1990 will be rendered liable to prosecution. You're seeing that alongside a succession of cases against fossil fuel companies, Exxon, Shell, etc. I think you're going to see a lot more legal action against the private sector in particular, which the fossil fuel companies have minimized the threat of climate change, in some cases obfuscated and tried to prejudice the debate about it. So I think you're going to see a recourse to courts, both in terms of the private sector and in terms of governments that fail to live up to their promises.
Zapiro, you've been sounding the alarm for years on this matter. We could call up a cartoon inspired by Edvard Munch's iconic painting, The Scream. You have Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro, fanning the flames, literally, and Donald Trump taking a selfie behind him. Donald Trump with a little shower head. There's another former leader who you always draw with a shower head, but why Donald Trump? Remind us.
Oh, that little added thing, which I did for a while. I had the golden shower on Trump. Remember, there's that
Right,
footage
okay.
which some people considered serious enough to actually have an investigation. And Trevor, my compatriot Trevor Noah, he had a fantastic segment on it where there was all the golden fittings in the bathroom and including showers, obviously the shower. So Trump it's a very dark thing because it contains a sort of a racist thing. Apparently Trump, from all understandings, there was a sort of a racist element of it. It was the bed that the Obamas slept in, apparently, which had to be urinated on, such as that's the report I've had. But that, of course, is incidental to the message of this cartoon, which is, as you've described, about the torching, the actual deliberate torching and burning of the Amazon, the most important, huge forest area in the world, but it represents what is happening in many places, especially with populist, often right-wing populists, but not only right-wing, but populist leaders like the two of them, Bolsonaro, who don't listen to anything that anyone is saying about the environment, about COVID, about anything. And, that was the message here was obviously that you need to cause alarm. The idea of whether we need to have hope. I was listening to David Attenborough, the great David Attenborough, the other day. And if anyone should, at his age, be hopeless, it would be him. But he actually inspired hope in so many people, including people like Greta Thunberg. You need activists, young and old. You need legislators. You need people to kind of take these issues on, as my colleagues were saying, and hopefully we can actually get somewhere. Yeah.
So, Noor Ibrahim, in Canada, there's always a conflict as well. It's not just in Brazil, because you have a huge environment movement there, and at the same time, you have a huge oil industry.
Absolutely. And the worst person possible, it seems, is responsible for it. It's definitely something that at least you have certain leaders, in Canada, when you look at Trudeau, he hasn't been perfect on this, but it's a huge, talking point, and it's something that, has a lot of public support, and there's kind of developments in that direction. So it's definitely very worrying when, the leader of a country like Brazil seems to just fan the flames, as we saw in that cartoon.
And Thursday was the national holiday in Canada, and it was a bit of a strange one.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a very, very tough few weeks, and just personally speaking, when you have these celebrations canceled, I think that there's definitely a larger conversation happening. Like,
celebrations
how can you
canceled over the
continue to
finding of those
celebrate
indigenous graves again. That's another mass grave site that they found.
Absolutely, and you have it's by the hundreds now. I think it's actually nearing 1,000, and I think what it's done is really kind of dismantle this false vision that a lot of people seem to have about Canada, that it's, this beacon of progress and acceptance, and not really looking at the history, the horrific history that's happened here. I think it's a moment of reckoning. I'm glad that, despite how upsetting and horrific the findings have been, that at least it's out in the open now, and people are pushing to have that conversation and address it in a legitimate way.
Piaski?
To come back on the climate issue, but we had this debate in France when the Yellow Vest movement started 2 years ago about the conflict between the end of the month and the end of the world. How to reconcile the economic needs of people to go to work, to generate income, to have development of their economy, and dealing with these global huge issues of the end of the world. And the Yellow Vest movement was the incarnation of this contradiction. And we haven't found the right balance, the right formula that allows people to live in today's world and to save the long term of the planet.
All right, we're going to look at another momentous event this week. You could call it a milestone, a country gunning to become capitalism's dominant power, all the while taking a day on Thursday to celebrate communism. Plenty of pageantry in Tiananmen Square and elsewhere as China marked 100 years since the day a clandestine meeting of 13 men in Shanghai signaled the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. In 2021, socialism with Chinese characteristics comes with a bit of muscle flexing, it seems.
The Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, oppress, or enslave them. Anyone trying to do so will most certainly face bloodshed in front of a great wall of steel built by more than 1.4 billion Chinese.
Patrick Smith, bit of playing to the home crowd there, or is this some kind of turning point we're witnessing?
I think it's both, actually. I think it's certainly a turning point in China's international trajectory, partly because of the reaction to China as much as anything else. I think the celebration of the centenary of the Communist Party and the speech she made yesterday is very much geared for the home audience. And a lot of people would talk about the ending bullying, particularly those countries in
Got the loudest
in the region.
cheer, by the way, when he said
that. Yes, would ask who's bullying who. What about the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong? What about the people of Taiwan who want to continue with a multi-party democracy there? I think it raises those questions. So I think it's less of a message to the outside world, but I think they did betray a growing concern that with Joe Biden's new government in the U.S., rather than going out on his own and just bashing China with a bunch of sort of flag-waving rhetoric, he's trying to assemble a global coalition to confront China on the question of values, if you like, the question of individual rights and sovereignty of neighbors in the region and so on. And that's altogether a much stronger threat to where China's going than perhaps definitely than what Trump was trying to do. So I think it's a bit of both. It's projecting it into the world, but also convincing people at home that China Communist Party's been around for 100, and it's going to be certainly around for another 100.
Do you agree with that point, Noor Ibrahim, that Patrick made about how Biden's approach to China ultimately could be more effective than that of Donald Trump's?
Definitely. I think that, his focus on speaking to regional allies and cementing that will be incredibly important. And I think that, we saw the celebrations that took place, but as much as there were elements of it that may have been boasting and grandstanding, we definitely have to take that seriously. And I think the best example of that was Hong Kong and, the law that we saw since last year and how that's changed the country and stripped people of personal liberties. You have entire huge media outlets that were just completely shut down and just complete quashing of dissidents. So in terms of Biden, I think he's definitely taking the right steps in terms of, again, those regional allies and developing those relationships. Would he go so far as to, send troops in if, we see an invasion of Taiwan in a few years? I don't know. But I think what he's doing right now is the best possible thing to do in this situation.
On Thursday, the Financial Times reported that there have been war games and maneuvers going on between the U.S. and Japan since 2019 in the eventuality that China did try to take on Taiwan. So it's definitely heating up. You can't help but wonder, though, Pieraski, Joe Biden may be a one-term president. Xi Jinping might be president for life. And you look at Thursday, do you ask yourself, was that China's party or Xi Jinping's party we saw?
Well, what Xi Jinping has managed to do is to make the Communist Party and the nation of China one. So today, if you criticize Communist Party policy, you criticize China. And there's a very strongly nationalist outlook. You could have it's all red and then the clenched fist and all the symbols of communism are there, but the reality is a nationalist party of a powerful China, and this combination of state and nation is a very strong element of Xi's policy, because that's the key for his prolonged stay in power, and that's a very tough thing to oppose. And to come back to your point about Biden and Japan and so on, this nationalism is based on an economic success, an unprecedented economic success, and therefore, you can criticize Hong Kong, you can criticize the fate of the Uyghurs, you can criticize the threats on Taiwan, but the most Chinese citizens, Han Chinese citizens, would say, okay, the Communist Party has succeeded, has lifted us from poverty.
We're going to pick up on that point when we come back.
And the last point is where Xi's talking to the rest of the world. He's not talking to us, the Westerners. He's talking to South Africa. He's talking to South America. He's talking to Asia.
And we will put it to Zapiro when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast deputy world editor Noor Ibrahim is in our company from New York City. Also with us, Pieraski, international news editor at French public radio station France Inter. Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report. Your cover story?
Cover stories about success, actually, rather clutching at straws maybe, but success nevertheless.
Success where?
Success around Africa, exiting from COVID, which is slightly ill-timed given what's happening at the moment.
I'm sure
with the third
Zapiro
wave.
has an opinion on that. Editorial cartoonist for the Daily Maverick newspaper, who joins us from Cape Town. Just before I turn to Zapiro on this issue of how China's perceived, I want to pick up on what Pierre Aski was saying just before the break. The love in China of the Communist Party is real. The East colors red, the sun rises is the name of the song. Dutch television went to Zunyi, that's in the southwestern province of Guizhou, where a crucial meeting cemented Mao's control of the party in 1935.
No matter where you are from, everybody in China has a great life.
Everybody in China has a great life.
Well, that's maybe a bit excessive, but certainly hundreds of millions of people have a better life today than they had 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that's one of the difficulties we have, is that if you're an 18-year-old today in China, you have your parents who grew up in the turmoil of the Cultural Revolution, your grandparents grew up in misery, and so today, okay, you don't have freedom, you have the weight of the Communist Party, but you have a better life. And that's, in the balance, it's one of the weak points of the criticism of China that we address. We don't have, the Western democracies are not in such a good shape at the moment that their criticism of China can be heard by everybody.
All right, the Chinese model versus the Western model is an argument playing out in Africa, where, Zapiro, you put a critical eye on Beijing's transactional approach to the continent. Here is a cartoon called Chinese Takeaway. And you see Xi Jinping making off with the entire continent, it seems.
You know, the way it appears to some of us, and opinions are so split. There's tremendous affinity with China from some people, but there are many of us who see another aspect to it. The kind of imperialism that the United States kind of imperialism, the kind of, go to other parts of the world and don't necessarily conquer them completely, but basically economically conquer them and bully and the way the United States has done that for many decades. Of course, the Soviets were also doing it in another way, and the Chinese were already doing it. But the Chinese have really, since the Deng Xiaoping came along and revolutionized in another way their economy and basically cherry-picked a whole lot of bits of capitalism to overlay over the supposed communism, and they're sort of communist in name, but act in a very capitalist way economically when it suits them, with an authoritarian overlay. I mean, that's how they come to Africa and other parts of the world. So they'll come and they won't. It's often not really to the great benefit of the countries that they come to. They come with their own teams. They don't necessarily provide enormous amounts of employment, but there are contractors who are part of the elite, who get sort of jobs along with these Chinese teams that come, and so there's corruption, which in China might be met with a bullet in the head, but in other places they kind of turn a blind eye, and they facilitate roads being built for the projects that they are creating. So it's a very, very sort of predatory approach to the continent and to other parts of the world. I was in Addis Ababa a while ago, and I saw enormous numbers of buildings that are kind of half completed. The Chinese are doing it all, but of course there's a bit of a spin-off, but it really does feel. And the other thing I would say, when I talk about an affinity with China from some people, there's an historic debt of gratitude both to the old Soviet Union and to the Chinese, because they did help different factions of the liberation movements across the continent. In South Africa, there was more of a connection in the old days to the Soviet Union, but there was a connection to the Maoists, to the Chinese as well.
That plays out. That plays out in that sort of that remnant of the past of the liberation struggle. In another cartoon that you did about vaccine nationalism, and you pull no punches when it comes to the South African black nationalist EFF parties clamoring for Chinese and Russian-made vaccines. Here you see Save Lives, Sputnik, and Sinovac now, and then the virus saying, "I'm with stupid." That's pretty. It's pretty blunt.
Yeah, well, these guys are, a very, very nasty sort of nationalist as well. I mean, they are nationalist populists who again cherry pick bits of socialism in some of their rhetoric, but they don't live up to that at all in the way that they behave. They in fact have been involved in huge corruption and living the high life while they call themselves the economic freedom fighters, the EFF. That's that little label on those berets. The economic freedom fighters, they are not, they're fighting only for themselves, but they've hoodwinked quite a lot of people who've become very disaffected from the very middle of the road bourgeois ANC, which
we'll talk more about in a moment. Patrick Smith, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the vaccine issue is actually one of the moral issues of our time, and I would say that the West is actually doing about as badly as China and Russia at the moment. We have a very simple calculus put together by the IMF of all people. $50 billion, we can vaccinate the world by the end of this year. Yet the richest countries got together in the G7 2 weeks ago under the malign chairmanship of Boris Johnson and failed to deliver. They could not come up with the money to pay for vaccines to save tens of millions of lives. And they're running around Africa and Latin America and Asia and saying, hey, our Western values are superior. We have the moral high ground on this. You can't even raise the money to vaccinate people. With respect to the US, it's at least doing something. I think this week it's got 500 doses of Pfizer and Johnson vaccines to Africa. The European, and that's the British in that category as well, much as they may not like to be in it, have not sent one single dose from their factories to Africa. It is a scandal.
But they've contributed to COVAX.
Yes, but the vaccines are not moving nearly and fast enough. COVAX is talking about 1.8 billion vaccines by early next year. So far, it's delivered 90 million. It's a scandal. Meanwhile, 15-year-olds are getting vaccinated in London. It's not good enough. They're not protecting the lives that they promised they would protect.
This past Monday seemed like a long time ago in Ethiopia. It was the day the country's Nobel Peace Prize winning prime minister staged a delayed general election in most, but not all of the country. The perception of Abiy Ahmed certainly changed in the eyes of Tanzanian cartoonist Gado. As we can see here, we have the ballot box, and there you see the peace dove, but it's got a noose around its neck in that cartoon. Pierre Haski, of course, we all saw what happened after that, after the elections. The government in Addis announcing a unilateral ceasefire in the rebel province of Tigray as the TPLF's armed wing took back the regional capital of Mekelle with celebrations in the street. Back in the capital, well, a different spin.
Mekelle, Abiy, and other places, when we see them militarily, they do not have the same appeal as when we went there. They have lost their center of gravity.
So it's not a defeat, they just lost interest in the place, is that it?
This is a bit ridiculous, to be honest. When this war started in November, Abiy Ahmed had promised a very quick police operation to kick out the TPLF in charge of the Tigray province. And 8 months later, the TPLF is back in Mekelle, and that's a really huge defeat for Addis Ababa, for the federal government, and personally for Abiy Ahmed. Now, it doesn't solve anything because Tigray is maybe back in TPLF hands, but it's completely isolated. It's in the midst of a huge humanitarian crisis. Millions of people are in need of food and medicine. 3 members of Médecins Sans Frontières were killed only a few days ago in that province. Communications are cut off. And where is it going? Is TPLF going to declare independence? Part of it wants that independence, which could lead to more unraveling of Ethiopia. There's the possibility that they might prolong the war towards the Sudanese border, which would give them an access to the outside world to get this aid. So it's not over. And for the moment, it doesn't look good for Ethiopia altogether because Mr. Abiy Ahmed has really mismanaged that.
Abiy Ahmed, former head of intelligence services, right?
One wonders
how did he get it so wrong?
advising?
He launches this offensive back in November with the help of neighboring Eritrea.
The funny thing is when he launched the war, he sacked 2 or 3 generals. And it seems that his intelligence services have let him down badly, to put it kindly. The strategy of finding an alliance with the Eritrean president, Isaias Afwerki, who has his own very specific agenda in Tigray, that is revenge for the losses he suffered, his regime suffered in the late 90s, has been a disaster. So what you've got now is that the TPLF have not only recaptured the regional capital at Mekelle, they've driven the Eritrean forces, humbled them, and pushed them out of northern Tigray. And there's now talk, as Pierre said, of perhaps hot pursuit operations across the border into Eritrea. So it seems that the important thing now is to try to find a way to get the TPLF into a dialogue to sort of consolidate this ceasefire and to begin some political talks. This stuff is never going to be settled militarily. There needs to be some sort of political course. I don't buy the idea that, that Tigray is going to thrive as an independent state. I think that's fantasy. But they clearly want to reestablish their rights under a federal constitution, which they were losing under Abiy Ahmed's policy.
Note the distress of aid agencies after the destruction of a second bridge on the Tekezi River, and that aid that's not been allowed through in 10 days now. Phone service and internet, as Pierre was saying, to Tigray still cut. 350,000 civilians face the immediate danger of starvation.
The fact is that people have died, people are dying, and more people will die if we're not allowed the ability to prevent it from happening and to provide assistance.
Noor Ibrahim, I come back to this. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee, they mean well, right? When they award the prizes, sometimes as an encouragement. But 2019 seems a long way away nowadays.
Absolutely, and you saw the same thing with the leader in Myanmar, and these discussions just keep on going. And, I think in this case, just watching this unfold and the fact that it's such a layered conflict, and it's not just a civil war, right? There's all these neighboring issues, and I think watching from afar, you just hope that it doesn't lead to another Rwanda, for example, and you just have to hope that we're not just watching that kind of thing unfold right in front of us.
We're going to turn our attention before we go to South Africa. Will Jacob Zuma go to jail, and will he go quietly? He's filed an 11th hour motion to stop his imprisonment. South Africa's highest court ordering the former president to turn himself in by Sunday to start serving 15 months for egregious contempt over his long-running refusal to appear before a corruption inquiry. His supporters gathering around his ranch in KwaZulu Natal. They call it a political witch hunt. That's not the way you see it, Zapiro. Your Thursday cartoon for the Daily Maverick has Lady Justice with her foot on Jacob Zuma. There's that shower head again, by the way, and who is still caught with his pants down, a reference to his previous rape and cases, I suppose. He is still mounting legal proceedings, and the suspense is still on as to whether or not Zuma will go to jail.
We don't know absolutely for sure. I think it's important to say about that cartoon about it's not only a reference to his previous rape trial. It really is mostly a reference to my cartoon of 2008, the rape of Lady Justice. It's certainly the cartoon I'm best known for. It brought an enormous lawsuit from Jacob Zuma. It was about the fact that he was bullying and threatening the judiciary in order to get the corruption charges dropped even before he became president, so that he could become president. And that imprint in the back of Lady Justice there is her. It was a sort of a gang rape scene. And it was an outrageous cartoon that drew huge criticism, but also a lot of support. And I believe it still says everything to me about how he behaved before his presidency, during it, and after. The latest sort of attempt at a stay of arrest is a typical Zuma kind of Stalingrad technique, where he's trying, on the one hand, to get the constitutional court, the apex court of the land, the equivalent of the American Supreme Court, is trying to get them to revisit their decision which was a very, very heavily worded decision to have him jailed.
But when we
visited
the subjects up here earlier in the week on this set, we had a Jacob Zuma supporter who was steadfast that this is a political witch hunt, and that Cyril Ramaphosa is guilty as well when it comes to corruption.
Look, I'm not going to go out and bat for almost anyone in our political climate down here and say that they're totally squeaky clean. But Cyril Ramaphosa is 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times better than Jacob Zuma, and is a constitutionalist at heart. He may have some skeletons in his closet, as most politicians do, but he and there's certain things where he hasn't kept his hands entirely clean. But Jacob Zuma, I just want to point out, the corruption charges that I did that original cartoon about stem from 1999. The first critical cartoon I did of Jacob Zuma when it became publicly known. So many years before he even became ANC president, let alone president of the country, stemmed from that. It became known in 2002. Then when he became president, having managed to get these corruption charges at least sort of pushed aside, the ANC embraced him, which they should never have done. They knew he was corrupt. And then he engaged in what we call state capture. He farmed out aspects of the state, appointments of cabinet ministers, to his cronies, mainly the Gupta family from India, but also another company called Basasa. And he basically let them kind of control him. And I mean, vast corruption, billions and billions of South African, many tens of billions of South African rands, and then the latest thing is just a contempt of court. He's now in contempt of the Constitutional Court for saying that he is supposed to have gone to the state capture inquiry that he in fact was forced to instigate himself, and he has not gone and told what he should. He's been there a few times, but he's also avoided it, and so he still has a huge amount. I mean, they will put him in jail. I believe if he doesn't go this week, they'll get him in jail. But it's going to be, when he eventually serves time for the big stuff, the corruption charges from 1999 and state capture. I mean, that's going to be years, and I mean, he would die in jail then.
Pieraski, was this a week where justice got up in South Africa?
I'm a great admirer of Zapiro's work for years, and I remember very vividly the rape of Lady Justice from that he was referring to. And so when the news came of his sentencing this week, it just came back to my mind. And I think, what was at stake is the rule of law in South Africa. And there was some despair. I was in South Africa 2 years ago again, and
because you're a former correspondent.
I was a correspondent during apartheid time, so it's a long time ago. But there was some despair that the country was losing the rule of law, that the foundation that was set up after the end of apartheid was crumbling, and all of a sudden this decision was seen by many people, not the Zuma supporters obviously, but many people in the country, in the civil society, as a proof that the institutions are still there, that there's still hope to revive this country, and Zuma has been definitely a terrible moment for South Africa. It's one of the biggest mistakes of the ANC, probably due to his history. He was 10 years on Robben Island. He belongs to that generation that feel that they've sacrificed so much for liberation that everything is owed to them, that they own the country, they own the justice and the press. And that's really something that should come to an end in South Africa if that country wants to have a future.
All right, it's all playing out in any case. I want to thank you so much, Pieraski, for joining us. I want to thank Patrick Smith. I want to thank as well Noor Ibrahim Zapiro for being with us from Cape Town. That exhibit opens this Saturday in the French capital at the Forum des Images. We want to thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.